Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Misty, I loved the interview with Dru Mitchell.
Well, Dru is somebody that talks from a place that has been reinventing herself and is very comfortable with the reinvention process for a long time. You can just tell that she gets it, she's happy in that place, and can bring it to others.
I think that's a very good point, that part of the ownership that has to go with pure reinvention is the individual being in an ownership place. And I think you're exactly right. Dru has been able to accept through her executive experiences, the role of ownership. And I think as we listen to the interview, we will hear in her reference many times how important that ownership piece is.
What was really compelling and what I think everyone should listen for as they're listening to the interview is how even though she's very comfortable in that space and is comfortable taking ownership, she still looked for a navigator. She still sought that other person to guide her, to help her stay on track and view things from a different perspective, all critical parts of reinvention.
Excellent point. Let's listen. Really excited today to welcome our friend Dru Mitchell to the Pure Reinvention Project. Welcome, Dru.
Thank you, Mike. Good to be here today.
I have had the privilege of working with Dru on many Pure Reinvention projects, so I'm really excited to talk about our most recent work together. Dru is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Clinton County Economic Alliance. Dru, can you tell us a little bit about that organization?
Certainly, Mike. We are charged with moving Clinton County forward from the development standpoint. So whether it's working with our businesses, our school systems, partnerships with other organizations throughout the county and the state, we try to help businesses do what they do better so they can grow and be successful in Clinton County.
And so with a lot of the work that we've done in Detroit and a lot of the work that we've done in associations, and of course we've talked to a lot of people about taking this kind of pure reinvention work and applying it in the private sector, I think what's really interesting in the work we most recently did with Dru is kind of working in that public sector, in that kind of almost like in a municipality standpoint. But I guess what's really been a core curiosity for me, Dru, is you had some background in how we did our work. You had gone into your new role as the President and CEO of the Clinton County Economic Alliance, and you saw an opportunity there. Can you describe that opportunity?
Certainly. I've been with CCEA, as our short initials, a year ago, February, and throughout the year worked to establish relationships with all sorts of people and organizations throughout the county, and saw that there was some identifiable issues that I thought we could help resolve. And knowing the pure reinvention process and how Mike works, that would be a great opportunity for us to work with him, with our board and leaders in the county to move things forward.
So you had a vision of kind of an outcome that you wanted to see as a result of investing your time in this process. And it seems like a part of that investment of time was helping your board understand how important moving in this direction was. Can you describe how you kind of were in a position to help the board kind of discover the Pure Reinvention Project?
Mm-hmm. I wanted them to be exposed to the process that you've developed with the 5 steps and how that can, currently, but then in the future, be revisited to address the issues and how our Clinton County Economic Alliance could be the solution to business-related issues in the county. And that thought process was that I was familiar with. I wanted their ownership of it too, and to develop their knowledge on how that should work.
And of course, a very strong component of the Pure Reinvention Project is that ownership that happens at the executive level. And now, Dru, you're beginning to describe how important that ownership of the project is at the board level. Can you explain why you felt so strongly that the board had to also own the importance of this project?
Well, my agreement with them, or my contract with them, is to fulfill our strategic plan initiatives, and I need their complete buy-in if they're developing a strategic plan for what my job description is going to be. That we all need to be in agreement of what those things are. What is their expectation of me and how can I fulfill it? So if I don't have all of their agreement and their ownership of what those items are, I'm, driving without a seatbelt.
So that's an interesting correlation. You saw the need for the board to own this process as importantly as the executive. So let's go back and talk about the executive for a minute. You had a chance to discover the importance of reinvention at some point in your executive background. How important is that understanding for the executive to have even before they take it to anyone else in the organization, like a board? How important it is for you to believe in it and you to understand the significance it can have?
Well, it's crucial, and it certainly is from a economic development standpoint, where normally it's a top-down, that pure reinvention is bottom up. I'm talking to people in the community, asking them what sort of issues do they have and what sort of help can I provide. And it's a complete reversal of traditional economic development theory.
So when you look at the strategic planning, the traditional strategic planning model, the traditional economic development model, as you described, where it's more top-down historically. Speak a little bit, Dru, if you wouldn't mind, to the importance of it being bottom-up and how the assessment phase allows for that development of that understanding of why.
Well, the process that we followed with you as our facilitator was interviewing a number of individuals in the county and outside the county in a variety of industries that were all important to Clinton County. And we were able to distill from those conversations market segments where we feel that we should be addressing most of our time, and most of my attention should be directed to these markets. Not that we're going to not do what I would consider traditional economic development activities, such as responding to site selection requests and helping entrepreneurs start out their business. But there are existing businesses there, existing relationships that we can develop that will better grow and faster, we think, grow our community.
How important is it for an executive like yourself, or even for your board of directors, to have that better understanding of focus? It seems to me like time is always the major understanding that an executive has to figure out where to spend their time. How does this new focus allow you to spend your time differently?
Well, our plan now drives how I spend every day, and who I give attention to, or what activities my attention are directed to. So it helps. It helps me focus, and it's easy for me to say, does it fit into what our critical fields are or not? If it's a no, it gets put to the bottom. Not that won't at some point address it, but it isn't, as far as the board and our executive committee are concerned, that isn't where I should be spending most of my time.
As you and I discussed in this process, in the kind of the three-step approach to kind of the strategic planning, where the first stage is the assessment stage, which is, as you described it, kind of that bottom-up understanding. Where most traditional strategic planning time is spent is in the actual meeting. Mm-hmm. Yet we put the focus in both the assessment phase, and then probably the other more important thing that we put a focus on was who and how the report was written at the end of the process. Can you describe how those two things, the assessment phase mm-hmm. up front and how the report was written on the end, became very defining in the role of the Pure Reinvention project?
Okay. Well, as with the assessment piece, we spent a lot of time, and within our executive committee or our core committee that was looking at this for the board, in developing our list of who was going to be interviewed by you. we wanted to make sure that we didn't have the funding for having 100 people interviewed. So the key people, the people that were identified as key individuals was crucial to us, we thought, for our success. And frankly, we did very well with that. And we think the outcome, frankly, was the results were pretty much what I was expecting, with just a couple of exceptions. And so that for me, reinforced that we made the correct decision on who those individuals were. And the second piece, we brought that core group together and reviewed with your leadership, identified what our market segments would be, what those 5 initiatives, or where initiatives would be developed around 5 key market segments for us. And then stepping down, then the next step was then identifying what exactly was the CCEA, how were they going to interact with those 5 markets, and it was the board members, it was that core group that said, we are looking at you as a convener or facilitator, a catalyst for activities.
You being you as the president and CEO of the
Yes.
organization,
Yes, of working with these groups to develop them both individually and coalesced, that they were, it needed to be a sustainable activities. So how could we help those organizations continue and be successful? And then the third point, which I think is really crucial to me, is looking at it from a 3D standpoint. So a 3D printer, where you, if you know how they operate, and they start from the bottom up and layer, till you come up with the end product. And that's how we looked at it. And this was not me leading it, certainly with your guidance and input on what you had heard from the interviews. It was the board coming up with, this is what we want Dru to be doing for the next few years.
So then you had your core key leaders who were coming up with these premises and identifying what they felt was the appropriate future role for yourself as the leader of this organization. How did you distill that into a report? Who wrote the report? Why was it important to understand who wrote the report, and how did you finalize that process?
Well, actually, I wrote the report.
You did?
I did. After meeting with this core group of individuals. So it was much of their words, and with your guidance for developing the segments, because there were some broad topics, and you were able to guide us to narrow what those really were. After a very extensive SWOT analysis, we haven't mentioned that, extensive analysis that was performed, and with complete buy-in every step of the way with these individuals.
I think in the traditional planning process, it's the role of the hired consultant to write the report. Yet we didn't do that. It was the responsibility of yours to write that report. Why did we talk about how important it was that you write that report?
Oh, well, it helped me clarify all the things that we had talked about, both with you and I, and with our core group, and for me with some other community members that were not included in the discussion. And for me to be able to present it to our board, to our membership, our executive committee, for the complete buy-in. And so certainly now for me to take it outside, with our county commissioners or with our Chamber of Commerce, it allowed me to really, I own it. It's on behalf of the Clinton County Economic Alliance, it's my roadmap.
It's absolutely amazing to me to listen to you talk about that, because again, in the traditional scenario, the consultant feels it's one of their deliverables to write the report. Yet when they leave, they take that ownership of that report with them. And even though the report is left, the most important part of that report, which is the ownership of it, leaves. And in the case that the Clinton County Economic Alliance used, is you accepted that responsibility. You owned that report, And every day, apparently, you look at that report and you own the behaviors, the new behaviors that go with implementing that report. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us some of your some thoughts on how the ownership of that report starts to move new behaviors for you as the executive, and more importantly, how those behaviors start to create new opportunities?
Okay. And I have to admit that writing a report like this, when we first had a discussion about, and oh, by the way, Dru, this is your responsibility for your, I'm thinking, oh, crap. But it is absolutely the right way to go. So it just helped me digest and internalize all the sorts of things that I knew I was going to be doing.
You just can't own somebody else's work.
You can't. You can't.
And
I've gone through strategic planning, exactly the model you've talked about in the past. Put it in a drawer.
You just can't own it.
Nah, yeah. You don't. So,
the most important gift you can leave is that ownership.
I think so too. So how does this drive what I do on a daily basis now? You're exactly right. I keep my little schematic on the top of my desk, and as I get a phone call or an invitation to a meeting or an email or do outreach in the community, I look at what the opportunity is that's being presented to me and whether it fits into one of our market segments, so that I can, and helps me evaluate how I prioritize what I do now.
Dru, what is your advice to other individuals who may be contemplating that it's time to do something different than what they've maybe traditionally done in the past in order to get some different results?
I think they need to look into pure reinvention. You know, the discovery of how you can do something differently, and the guidance that you provide every step of the way, especially from right at the beginning with this core group of board members, as we were just talking about the strategic planning, from when you first met with our board chairman. It's the ownership component that the organization has, that you let us have and help us get to that point.
I think that's absolutely the key, and I think that the example that that most recently through the Clinton County Economic Alliance, other examples where you and I have worked together on certain projects, and I'm sure there will be ones into the future. It is a very dramatic, in any sort of circumstance, we've learned that you have to allow the individual who's going to implement to own whatever it is that is an end result. I want to thank you, Dru, President of the Clinton County Economic Alliance, for your insights. They've been fantastic and serve as a great reminder of how pure reinvention can be applied in almost any set of circumstances in many, many different ways. Misty, I think there's a wonderful example for the pure reinvention energy to recognize its value to municipalities and not just necessarily associations. And I think Dru proved that for us in this interview.
She did. Her ability to be so comfortable with the reinvention process is a huge asset for the Clinton County Economic Alliance, and probably beyond that, the businesses that they touch, because she said in her interview that she saw this opportunity to grow and she wanted to monopolize on that. She wanted to be the solution for businesses in that county.
That to me was amazing. I think that very statement of being the solution is absolutely where the heart and the soul of pure reinvention is coming from. And Dru did say that. In fact, she said that many times during the process of being involved, is she wanted to be part of the solution. Now, they needed to go through this process to understand what it was, but that was the driving force, was to allow the solution to be the opportunity.
And bringing the board along from the get-go and encouraging their ownership and their full buy-in makes perfect sense. She understood it, but she needed them to get it so they could provide that oversight and the true guidance to push her forward.
You know, that's a really, really key point, and that is the executive who many times gets to be an executive in an executive position because of their solution-oriented capabilities, has to also bring the key board along with them. And as Dru mentioned, while she might understand and have that drive, if she's ultimately going to be long-term successful, that those key board members who are involved in this process have to be as committed and have to take that same kind of ownership.
And I want to know a little something about, Dru kind of made a joke or a jab at you a little bit, because she said, well, I wrote the report on this because I took ownership of it. And I knew that that sounded like you saying, I'm not touching this. This is yours.
Well, that was me, and that's because in the Pure Reinvention model, one of the things that's absolutely imperative, whether we're doing strategic planning or whatever the opportunity is, the ownership of it is critical. And so many times the traditional model has been the outside person comes in on the white horse, takes them through an exercise, and leaves a document that nobody quite knows where it came from, nobody knows what to do with it, and therefore never gets implemented, which seems like really a kind of a giant waste of time. And yet, if you transfer that ownership to the people who actually live there, who are actually invested and vested, then the entire ability to move that process forward dramatically changes. And so it is very different to present to a group that they are responsible for writing the report. And I've got to be very honest with you, Misty, there are groups that have said we don't want to do this because they don't want to do the report, which to me correlates to I don't want to take ownership.
Exactly. And Dru said it perfectly. She said, our plan drives what I do every day. I come into work and know what I'm doing because I have the plan. I take a phone call and I look at our grid and I know how to execute this and how it fits into where we're going. And to me, there's the creative side of me who wants no plan and wants to explore. But even that creative side looks for the constraints and looks for that grid. If we're moving forward, we need to keep our eye on the prize, have that ownership, and keep it in front of us every day.
I think that focus is absolutely imperative from the executive, and for that executive to also build with the board team the importance of that agreed upon focus. So many times the agenda of the executive and the agenda of the board is not always the same. And that gets to be very frustrating for both groups because they do not mesh well when they have differing agendas. In this particular case, Dru was able to build into the process the ability for keyboard members to own to the same degree and understand to the same degree what she understood, and for them to own the final document that now when there is discussions about activities that the Clinton County Economic Alliance needs to be involved in, everyone understands what the priorities are. And I think that's just so critical.
Mm-hmm. It was totally cool when she said, this isn't a traditional strategic plan. We aren't following a method that has been in place for years and really isn't working anymore for us. We're going to do the Pure Reinvention model. We're going to call in a navigator, and we're going to talk to people. That was another thing, and I'd like to hear a little more about that from your side, is she said they were very strategic in who they chose to speak with. And how did that work? Were they looking for various point of views, or what was going on there?
Well, that was a great point. Dru is very courageous in the viewpoints that she's brought forward in what this process really has meant to the CCEA. Because in most cases, municipalities and these kind of organizations have limited assets, they had to be very careful about the investment in the assessment phase, and it didn't consume their entire budget. So what Dru was tasked with doing is going through their list and taking a very critical look at why each person was asked to participate. And in many cases, the people that we talked to had no understanding of what CCEA even was.
Wow.
And so it was I guess it would be more like a 360-degree process where people were providing input into a business that in many cases they didn't even know what it was. And because of that, they had various inputs which were not biased because they hadn't been involved. Yet they were extremely driven by what the county needed. And so there is a very different perspective when you're able to allow the process to identify what's needed, as opposed to what biased information already exists.
I love that you said she was courageous for that, because you're right on. It does take courage to open yourself up for, I don't know what the answer is going to be here, but I'm going to listen to it. I'll take it and I'll learn from it, and I will find out what we need in the process.
The executive has to trust that the need for the business or the association is there strong enough that the ability to discover what is next becomes the driving force. I think in some cases, we're afraid to find out that what we're doing may not be as effective as we think it is. And it's so scary to kind of look at what's on the other side or what's next, that I do believe Dru was very courageous in saying, we have a real opportunity to do something special here, but we're probably going to have to do it differently.
Let's be the solution, no matter what it takes.
And the bottom line is as you just said it, Misty, let's be the solution. If you're ready for change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @PureReinvention or sign up for our mailing list at PureReinvention.com.